if people who are dating would hand this to the person that they're dating and say, look, early on in our relationship, if you'll be a co-parenting supporter, then you'll be a good step parent in the future. If you're a co-parenting detractor, then really my desire to be involved in an intimate relationship shouldn't trump my decision to make a good decision as a parent.
Welcome to episode 278 of the Not Your Kids podcast. Okay, y'all, this episode is part 2, a continuation of our podcast last week with Bradley Craig, author of Between Two Homes. We are going to jump right into it. I said something to David, and he said, quit having the victim mentality. I'm like, whoa. That ticked me off, number one. But number two, I'm like, how am I not the victim? I don't understand, because it's not like I was making this up. I wasn't imagining what was happening. And out of everybody's issues, I was the focus. I was the problem. So help me understand that as far as the victim mentality, because I don't want to have a victim mentality, but I still, to this day, I'm like, wait a minute, this was happening to me.
Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between being an actual victim and having the victim mentality. So let's talk a little bit about that difference. So, we talk about like victims of domestic violence, and I actually hate that phrase. To me, they're survivors of domestic violence,
Yes.
Not victims. They've gotten out of that situation and hopefully are remaining away from that situation and not re-engaging in a new relationship that's that way. But we're all victims of circumstances, where things happen to us that we're victims of. I would say the legal process, there's a concept called therapeutic jurisprudence. And this concept of therapeutic jurisprudence is really, I think, the way we're going, hopefully, in family law. And therapeutic jurisprudence is the concept of how can the law, like family law, be something that helps families through this transition rather than creates divisiveness.
Right.
There's been lots of studies on this. And, again, language is a big part of it. When professionals are using words like possession, custody, visitation, primary parent, secondary parent, all these terms work against the family system. But the system can be set up very victimizing. If you are going through either a divorce or a legal action involving the children, maybe, again, you were never married, but you still have to come up with a plan, you can be victimized by that process. There's collaborative law that helps families transition much better. There's mediation, which often helps families resolve it. Lots of states order families to take co-parenting classes. So we have these therapeutic jurisprudence interventions now that are hopefully helping these families kind of come up with their own destiny and path. But man, you talk about 2 years of ongoing litigation and then a final trial that may last 2 days. And in Texas, you can have a jury trial. So that can last a week. I mean, that you can be a victim of that system. And that's a hard process to go through. So there, what I'm trying to explain is there are situations where we're victims. We're victims of cancer. We're victims of, fill in the blank of different things that we can be victims.
I was victim of mean people.
Yeah, there you go. The victim mindset is somebody who blames other people for their own faults.
Okay.
Or actions or behaviors, continues to make choices that are poor choices, but blames other people for it. So,
kind of like, again, they made me. Yeah. That's the victim mentality.
They made me is a victim statement. I chose to is an empowered statement.
Now, you were talking about the stuff that's coming into court, that we hope things are going that way. The family court system, and it's not just the family court system, the court system in general is a hot mess. And we know it. Anybody that lives here knows it. It's supposed to be you're supposed to have justice from it, right? And in the family court system, unfortunately, going through it for 18 years, it's not black and white. And you brought up a mediator. A mediator is like going to court. It's playing, I always say Russian roulette, and that's not what I mean. I mean the red and black thing. What's that thing? Roulette, right? Isn't that the name of the game?
Roulette wheel? Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not a gambler.
Yeah.
So, since I'm on video.
Well, I'm not either.
I have played slots, and I'm really bad at it, is what I've learned. But yeah, I think that's a roulette wheel.
Yes. I went to Atlantic City and spent $20 on the nickel slot machines. That's my speed.
Yeah.
So you meet with a mediator, and they make you feel like, if you don't agree to this, you never know what's going to happen. And it's so stressful. And one thing I like about your book is if people can learn from this book, just like if people can learn from Nacho Kids and people can learn from Anthony Cancel at Pro Say Dad, how to work this whole dynamic better, it would save you a fortune financially, stress wise, and all that stuff.
A lot of mediators give my book to families before they mediate with them because, there's a whole section on developing a parenting plan.
Right.
Why spend $500 an hour on a mediator when some of these things you can work out yourselves, maybe, and then you bring it to the mediator with issues resolved. And I think mediators are experiencing a higher success rate, especially with family law cases, when parents take co-parenting education classes or, read co-parenting books and handouts. The number one complaint I get for the class is we wish we'd taken this sooner.
Yeah. That's the same thing we hear about people join the academy. I should have done this sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mediation too. Let's talk about that because I'm not sure what it's like in your state. There's different types of mediation, and a lot of parents aren't informed about the different types of mediation. So, for example, in Texas, mediators for the most part are attorneys or retired judges.
Yep.
And they do what's called a caucus model, where mom and mom's attorney sit in one room, dad and dad's attorney sit in the other room, and the mediator goes back and forth. And they try and do it all in one day. And sometimes, putting a lot of pressure at times on the family. It's like, we'll go to midnight to reach an agreement. That's a form of mediation. And I'm not saying it's not successful because I work with an awful lot of families where it was successful for them, but it's only one form. There are also mediators who do transformative mediation, like I do, where I have mom and dad sitting in the same room with their attorneys, and their attorneys are trained to help facilitate agreements. So rather than the mediator going back and forth, the whole team kind of is helping the family come up with their own plan.
Right. Instead of segregating people.
Yeah. When it comes to property and 401k plans, maybe they don't need to be in the same room. But when it comes to the children, if you look at the full concept of mediation, the underlying concept is transforming conflict. And if we can teach these people to transform conflict, it's not just the goal of reaching agreement, it's teaching them how to reach agreements. And so we use things like interest-based negotiation and things to help them learn what they want to. That's used a lot in collaborative law too, with family systems. So that's something families just don't know. And for that matter, if you go to mediation and didn't work, there's nothing stopping you from going to another mediator. Just because that mediator didn't work, why stop there? What I find, at least here in Texas, is mediation is typically held towards the end. There's already a final
right before court.
2 years. Yeah, they could have mediated earlier. And that's something I frequently recommend in my class in the book. It's keep going to mediation. Every 3 months, go back to mediation. See what progress you can make. When I mediate, I usually will only do like a 4-hour session at the most because we get exhausted. But I also often don't want to have an agreement at the end of that. I want them to come back in a couple of weeks. So
I'll want them to think about it.
Exactly. I tell them, look, sounds like we've got a good parenting plan. That schedule for your kiddos sounds like it's going to work pretty good, but I want you to try this out for 3 weeks and come back. If the shoe fits good, maybe we'll cancel the mediation. You don't need to come back. We have a good agreement. But if it's a little uncomfortable, let's see if we can't fine tune it.
Right. Now, you mentioned something that I found very interesting about you can have a jury trial in Texas.
In Texas.
And I actually interviewed a guy, and I'm thinking he was from Texas because we met him in Texas, and he did have a jury trial. But David and
I think Texas is the only state that does that.
We think that it should be more states that do that because, again, the family court system, most of the time you've got an attorney, they've got an attorney. The attorney doesn't really know you as a person. They know the facts you're bringing to them. They aren't as invested as you are because, look, they've got 20 other cases and some of them are severe, traumatic cases. And then you've got this judge that's listening to this lawyer that knows a little bit about you. And he's trying to tell the judge that you're the best person for the kid. And the judge here's 10, 15 minutes usually, and they never talk to you unless you go on the stand. And then, of course, the attorneys are trying to provoke you to get you to get angry on the stand. It is a mess.
It is.
And I tell you, I got a lot of my attorney's fees reimbursed to me, which I'm thankful for. And this was over 18 years. I'm telling you, you would not believe how many times I was in court. But you know what I could have done with that money for my kid? And not only that, but a lot of it was out of fear. Like, for instance, say that the co-parent doesn't come pick the kid up when they're supposed to. And then they're 3 hours late, but they threaten that if you don't bring the kid, they're going to take you to court. Everything's, I'm going to take you to court. I'm going to take you to court. And so you're afraid if I don't take my kid back, because that wasn't in my papers, of what if they didn't show up. And so we always say that if you could have a panel of 3 judges, that 3 of them at least have been in a step family or a blended family or something like that, but that has dealt with this personally, it might help them. We have worked with many judges, many attorneys, many therapists, counselors, you name it. And we've had several attorneys tell us that several of our courses, if they could make people watch it before they come into their courtroom, they would. And it's basically to calm down the situation.
Yeah. And it depends on the laws in your state. In Texas, the courts can order co-parenting education classes. Most states mandate that you must take a co-parenting education class. But in Texas, the judge may recommend or may order that they take courses. And of course, then there's a certificate of completion that they file.
Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about what you were saying. You're thinking jury trials everywhere. And I'm not sure I agree.
Okay.
I would say this, that there are times at a jury trial I can see advantageous. And I'm not opposed to the concept of jury trials, again, because we're one of the few states that do it. I think if you have a judge who maybe doesn't understand the dynamics of families raising children between 2 homes and, hasn't studied the research on children growing up between 2 homes and things, maybe a jury trial is good. If you have a biased judge, one who's biased towards men or towards women or against same-sex couples or fill in the blank. If you've got a biased judge, a jury trial can be advantageous for at least a jury of peers to make that decision. On the other hand, that jury of peers often hasn't studied any more of this and brings their own bias of their own experiences growing up. I tend to lean the other direction of what we should do to change the law. And that's, again, that therapeutic jurisprudence. There's places like California where the judicial system is set up very different.
Yes.
Where they may have like a court master who is a judge or a different role that sits down with the parents and actually does communicate with them and get to know them more. Here in Texas, our court systems are very different. So, for example, in a smaller county, like the county where I live, we have a general jurisdiction judge who hears all cases. So, you basically walk in that courtroom and you can be hearing a murder case, and then the case after that is a divorce case. But we also have, for larger counties, courts that specialize in family law. And many of these judges do study and research and understand the dynamics of families raising children between 2 homes. And they're more prone to do the therapeutic jurisprudence. I could make this decision for you guys, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you to Nacho Kids, or I'm going to send you to Between 2 Homes. I'm going to send you to these other programs before I make that decision to see if you can't make these decisions yourself. I want to empower you before you give your child's fate to a complete stranger like me.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing, is when you leave it up to a judge, you're letting a complete stranger, based off of however many hours of research, which is usually, I just haven't had a good experience with attorneys either. My first attorney, he had the mentality of everybody's going to get along. Everything's going to be great. So, of course, my court order didn't specify a lot of things that it should have. And I think one of the things, too, that needs to be incorporated in this. What was your word you used that they're trying to do where like the therapeutic, was it therapeutic?
Therapeutic jurisprudence.
Yeah. So when they're doing that, I think it's also important. I just completely lost my train of thought. Hang on a second.
While you're thinking, I do want to address the importance of supporting parenting coordination. I don't know what the laws are in your state if there are coordinators, but I bet an awful lot of the families that you all work with could benefit if they're high conflict from
Mhm.
having a parenting coordinator. Basically, somebody who's case managing that, somebody
Right.
who's, instead of feeling fear, it's 6 o'clock and my co-parent hasn't shown up. What do I do? You have a professional that already has addressed that with you. It's already part of your plan. If you don't show up by this time, then you either lose your parenting time, or you have to come pick up the child from whatever location they're at, or fill in the blank. So you're less worried because you have a professional that you're turning to. A
Right.
professional who may be reaching out to dad and saying, "Hey, where are you? Exchange time is 6 o'clock."
Right. Right.
Now,
Well,
that wouldn't be me. I've done this a long time, so I stopped working at 5, but I
yeah.
still
Yeah.
help my families come up with plans that address, look, this seems to be reoccurring, so let's come up with a solution. Let's come up with your court order doesn't address, what if you don't show up? So let's come up with a written plan of how you're going to handle that.
That's where I was going with that. Was I think that attorneys create more work, resulting in more money. So, for instance, there was, and now granted, it was lack of education on my part, but I shouldn't have to be a lawyer to have a lawyer. But again, I've learned through the process that a lot of times attorneys will deliberately put specific wording in a document in the court order to where if there's something unresolved, and it's not as simple as once they have this information they provide it, it's, oh no, you've got to go back to court. And so I don't know if you even know who Anthony Cancel is, but he's pro se dad. He teaches fathers to represent themselves in court. Well, or not necessarily represent themselves in court, but to understand the system better and understand what is good evidence. The Facebook post, 99% of them don't matter. You're wasting your time. Stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I think that the more that we can educate these people too, of this is what's going to happen if you can't come to an agreement, then it would kind of push them to want to come to an agreement, I guess. And we had
Yeah.
joked that AI would be a good judge because you don't have to worry about the bias.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to worry about any of that. It's AI. You plug it in. Okay, dad, you get
Here's
this.
the
Mom,
results. Yeah.
yeah. Mom, you get
But what
this.
data is inputted and how is it inputted and
Yeah,
what bias
exactly.
goes into the information,
Yeah. And who
I know
inputs it?
I
Just
know
like
I've done
the,
a couple things AI that I'm like, that is nothing like what I was looking for or
yeah.
asking about or
Yeah.
fill in the blank. But
But talking about the parenting coordinator, I don't know that we have those in South Carolina. I do know that I had to have a guardian ad litem assigned at one point, and that was a joke. It was a pure joke.
mm,
I don't know. I know this. I found out later this attorney was going through a lot, but still, it was just crazy. It was a hot mess. It was useless and it was a waste of money. I think that a lot of times, if you do have mediators that aren't tied to the family court system, it's almost better because they're looking at it from more of a personal standpoint, from a legal standpoint, or maybe have one of each. But the guardian ad litem we had, like I said, it was a joke. And I still don't understand how he was put in that situation. But then you've got the parenting uh,
coordinator.
coordinator. We do have several people that have worked with those. I think it would be very beneficial for South Carolina to have those, every state, really, because like you said, 6 o'clock at night, what do I do?
Mhm,
Or I've got to take my kid to the hospital. Do I need to worry about calling his dad?
mhm.
Is, refresh me of what's in my court paper. I can see somebody at midnight looking through the court papers to see, because a lot of times we don't even understand our court papers.
Yeah. And as the parenting, what we call in Texas parenting facilitator, but nationally parenting coordinator, as the parenting facilitator, for example, I'll monitor their Our Family Wizard communications and
Mhm.
I'm training them how to communicate better. I have a 1-page handout that these are the guidelines for written communication. and I expect you to follow these guidelines. There's some good books and references out there. Bill Eddy has a book that's a whole book written about how to communicate
Yes.
well with
It's actually
the
written on my
co-parent
board over here.
yeah, or with anybody else. And I really respect and love Bill Eddy's work. But I do sometimes tell people, or you can just use this page from mine and just stick it to your computer. And before you hit send, check these off. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, go ahead and rewrite it. And I find that's really helpful. And I think I have that for free on my website too. You can print it out, but it's in my book and workbook and things too. Bill Eddy's work is really great at helping understand some of the underlying thoughts that help you facilitate a change and wanting to write better, and how to disengage from your co-parents' communications, kind of like my workbook does. But honestly, just a one-page handout, stick it on your computer, and I'm going to keep it in draft in Our Family Wizard, and I'm not going to hit send until I've gone through this.
Well, Our Family Wizard is supposed to help with that, right? Doesn't it put the smiley face or say this is attacking, or I've never used it.
So Our Family Wizard, yeah, it has what's called a tone meter. And the tone meter gives you kind of a heads up that you may want to rethink this. They can still send it however they want to, but it'll just say, look, this is not appropriate. I do a lot of work with Our Family Wizard, and in fact, I have a meeting with them tomorrow.
Oh.
And I joke with them that, hey, once I got a tone meter and I'm teaching my families to communicate, I actually prefer the families I'm working with are not using the tone meter, because I want to be teaching them how to communicate. I don't want that, and I want to know spontaneously what they're saying after reading those guidelines rather than a tool interrupting it. But I would encourage you, if you want a good guest on your show, get one of the representatives of Our Family Wizard, because Our Family Wizard has been an amazing tool for a lot of families in reducing conflict and helping them work through co-parenting issues. And, it's got all the tools to make co-parenting easy. I don't get any money from Our Family Wizard. I just want to clarify. I don't and there's other good apps out there. There's App Close.
I can't even remember the names of them.
I was interviewed on one and I blinked out of Florida. But there's a lot of good ones out there, but none of them so far for me do what Our Family Wizard does.
I know. Well, does Our Family Wizard, it helps you with the communication, right? But also it's different because it can be used in court versus emails or text messages. Is that correct?
I mean, there's all, you know what? If I continue this, I'll be doing a sell pitch for Our Family Wizard.
I know.
I think I'd rather focus back on my work with families and things. But just have them on. That's the fairest thing to say. There's so many things that it does well. It's got a calendar. The advantage is you can read messages. So I, as the parenting facilitator, can log in. And if I have a parent who says, well, my co-parent never told me, I can say, December 5th.
Right.
You read this message. So they did inform you.
Well, I asked that simply because my ex, they had me read an email on the stand. They're like, did you type this? And I skim it. I didn't read the whole thing. And I was like, yeah. And he said, even the part at the third paragraph, whatever. And I looked down, I was like, no. So they had edited my email to show that the communication I was saying was edited, was said was not. So that's why I asked about that, because I guess you can't manipulate Our Family Wizard as easily.
You can't. And they'll be glad to tell you all about that and why it's accepted by courts and why their documentation is valid, and fill in the blank.
All right. So let's talk about step parents for a second.
Okay. Let's do that.
You've talked about some of the people that you work with, the high conflict comes from the step parent.
I don't know that it comes from the step parent, but the step parent doesn't help.
Right. Is that because you see a lot of step parents trying to step into that parenting role?
I was on a chat many, many years ago, and they would always refer to the mom as BM.
By a mom.
And I was like, what is, when I thought of BM, I wasn't thinking of
bowel movement.
It took me a while, and I was like, wait, you're either the mother or you're not, unless you're the adopted mother. Why should we be ashamed of being SM or SF
Mhm.
Nothing wrong with that. And mother and father is just mother and father. And you could
Right.
just see almost the bias in the and once they started referring to that parent as the bio mother, there was a lot more of the X, and then it was the wicked bio
Mhm.
BM, and it's just again that language. If you're comfortable as stepmom referring to the child's mom as mom,
Mhm.
psychologically you're in a good place. If you're not, go see a counselor or therapist, work through some of those things. There are some exceptions to that,
That's a good
obviously.
point. That's a good point because I know a lot of times I will say bio mom instead of just mom. But I
Why?
think it's just a differentiation to say, okay, bio mom, stepmom. You got BM, stepmom, bio dad, stepdad, just kind of that way. But I can see how what you're saying about that.
Yeah, it's as if, well, because if I'm SF, then
Mhm.
there must be an BF. I think a lot of times we do have those cases where a stepfather or stepmother, and I will say in most of my cases, it's the stepmother who oversteps their bounds and oversteps
Mhm.
their role and suddenly starts writing the messages in our family wizard. I've worked with an awful lot of families who mom and dad admit they're high conflict now, but mom and dad will admit, for 7 years, we got along great. And the minute we
Until,
married, then it went south.
yeah.
And sometimes it is because of the step parent.
Mhm.
Sometimes that step parent is focused on jealousy, insecurity, wants to use the term BM.
Mhm.
And it's like, look, if you're uncomfortable that the person you're thinking of marrying reproduced with somebody, then don't marry them. Go
Right.
see a counselor, therapist, work through that. And that's another reason why I like that use of mother or father as opposed to X, because
Mhm.
X gets me, oh, his X. But yeah, my stepson's mother,
Mhm.
that means something very different.
Yeah.
And it expresses something different. I will say with an awful lot of my cases, though, I don't think it's not necessarily, it's not really stepmom, it's dad. And what I mean by that is mom and dad got along great. Dad was flexible. Dad considered mom's point of view. Mom considered dad's point of view. They were cooperative. And then dad gets remarried, and it's typically the men. In a lot of my cases, I don't have any studies to validate this nationally, but I
Mhm.
would say with my cases that suddenly go, oh, well, now I'm remarried. I have a new family. Instead of saying I have an addition, I've added a new person to the family. I have a new family now, and he just starts listening to the stepmom and
Mhm.
whatever the stepmom does. I can't tell you how many cases I've worked with where the dad changes religion when he gets married.
Mhm.
They agree they're going to raise the child Catholic. They
Mhm.
divorce. They agree they're going to raise the child Catholic. Suddenly, dad starts dating a Southern Baptist, and he now wants to start bringing the child to
Yep.
a Southern Baptist church, which
Yes.
cooperative co-parents can work out together, but not always. So when I say the step parent, there are cases where clearly a step parent has been overly intrusive. I have cases where step parents are ordered not to show up at parent teacher conferences, doctor's appointments because of the conflict they created.
Mhm.
I once did a custody evaluation where I recommended that the stepmother have no access to the child. That included during dad's parenting time. The court ordered
Mhm.
stepmom could not have access during dad's parenting time. Sadly, what happened is dad stayed in the marriage and chose not to get a divorce and move forward. A lot of the high conflict families that I've worked with, sometimes divorce does fix things, in situations. But in an awful lot of my cases, the step parent just seems to be almost the hero, of that family system. It's the stepdad or stepmom who takes a step back, who, will listen to their spouse, but doesn't overinflame or
Mhm.
encourage the victim mindset. Again, one of my favorite handouts in working with families is my handout called Co-parenting Supporters and Detractors. And if people who are dating would hand this to the person that they're dating and say, look, early on in our relationship, if you'll be a co-parenting supporter, then you'll be a good step parent in the future. If
Mhm.
you're a co-parenting detractor, then really my desire to be involved in an intimate relationship shouldn't trump my decision to make a good decision as a parent.
Right. And, that's what not showing is, giving that responsibility back to the bio parent, the bio dad, the dad.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of times too, the stepmom, they do come in all gung ho. I'm gung ho. I'm going to save this family from demise because they couldn't have made it without me. And everybody's going to be in shape and just everything's going to be great. But a lot of times it's also because the man expects that.
Mhm.
And that just goes
Yeah.
to gender roles, I believe.
Sometimes it is that way. For some cases, I'm sure the reason they got along cooperatively before dad got married is because dad listens to women.
Hmm.
And vice versa. There's women who
Right.
listen, fill in the blank. I'm not trying to be sexist here. And there's same sex couples where the same dynamics apply, fill in
Right.
the blank. But, when somebody's prone to listen to somebody else, then they get married to somebody, they're prone to start listening to that person because they see that person every day. And
Right.
so, of course, their co-parent then is, wait, what's this big change? And then the co-parent may start blaming it on the step parent as opposed to, wait, the problem here is I've been able to dominate this person. Now somebody else is dominating this person and
Yes.
they're winning.
Yeah. And we've seen it a lot where stepmoms, especially, will push their partners to get more time with their kids
Uh-huh.
and then they regret it.
Hmm.
The way I look at it is if your partner wanted more time with their kids, they would have done that prior to you coming into the relationship or do that without you telling them to. You know, there's a difference in support and pushing someone. And I'm a firm believer if your partner doesn't have their kids but a specific amount of time and they're not trying to increase that time, then leave it alone.
Yeah. And think about it from this perspective too. For example, I was doing custody evaluations for a long time in my career. And it was interesting that sometimes a parent wouldn't file for a modification until coincidentally they were remarried. And when they were remarried, it's not like anything changed for them. It's just, so for example, it may be a mom who would now have a stay home husband or a dad who has a stay home wife who's
Mhm.
now filing for modification, not because of how capable they are, but how dependent they are on this other person that's in the home.
Mhm.
And I would explain, and I testified to this many times on the stand, that unless there's danger or risk to the child, I have difficulty recommending that scenario because we know that the statistical probability of a second time marriage surviving is even lower than first time.
Yeah.
And if I were to recommend the child go with the person who's the most dependent on a step parent to take care of the child, I'd be recommending the parent with the least ability to independently take care of the child. And the minute stepmom or stepdad says, wow, you are an unhealthy person. No wonder he or she divorced you. I want to
Mhm.
divorce you too. Now you've left that child with the person least capable of
Right.
independently taking care of the child.
Right. It's as a step parent, it's hard when that relationship fails if you've got a bond with the stepkids.
Yeah.
And it's like you were talking about earlier about the grandparents being affected. Our whole society is affected by this step family stuff.
Yeah.
And there's terms that you don't like that I don't like. I don't like bonus mom or bonus dad.
I don't
And I
either.
laugh because a lady I was interviewing one time, she said, that sounds like a booby prize.
Mhm.
And we just laugh about it. But I also don't like the word step mom or stepdad simply because adding mom or dad on the end gives that person the thought that they have motherly or fatherly authority.
Mhm. So I'm going to agree on one end and maybe disagree on the other end.
Okay.
I'm going to agree with you with bonus parent that the only time a bonus parent should be referred to as a bonus parent is if a child feels so close to that individual that they feel like it's a bonus parent.
Right. They
And
refer to
typically,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
and typically that doesn't occur until they're teenagers or maybe adults. It's yeah, I had my bonus dad walk me down the aisle with my biological dad. And it's a term they created.
Right.
We had some professionals locally who were forcing parents to call the step parent a bonus parent.
Mhm.
And that came up in a training that a colleague of mine was doing, but I happened to be there. And we just, you could hear the gasp in the room of mental health professionals going, what? Because an awful lot of step parents are not bonus parents to these children. You know
Mhm.
what? Let me rephrase that. Most are a bonus. Most step parents, I think, are good, loving, wonderful people who do a great job helping out and taking care of children. It's just most of the cases I deal with fall under
Same.
that umbrella of high conflict. And so they're not a bonus to these children. In fact, if anything, they've created a great deal of conflict.
Mhm. More like a bomb.
Yeah. Step, though, is a term I've thought of a lot over the past years because there was a group who was opposed to calling families blended families. And it was a group of step families. And they were, because we're not, you just don't describe us well. We're not really blended family. And they already came from a family. So I think the problem with our generation, especially, is we have a bias towards that term step. And because of Disney films, because of all these other things. And I think that's where most of us hate, just have this negative feeling of step.
That
I'm
doesn't bother me at all.
I'm more in the world. Yeah, I'm more in the world of, I think we should call everybody stepsons and stepdaughters, and it becomes natural.
It's reality.
And we punish people like Disney for doing what they, but to be fair, TV shows nowadays do a really good job for the most part of showing co-parenting successfully between two homes. A lot of the TV shows do well. There's the movie Stepmom, which I think was just a great movie that really shows the dynamics of how hurtful and difficult it can be to be in a step family.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should get rid of the word step. I really support it.
No, I like the word step.
People to go, I love it.
Yeah, I like the word step. It's the mom part of it. So just, you could say it step person instead of stepmom or stepdad, because really putting that mom on there or that dad, I'm the mom in this home, or I'm the dad in this house. And it doesn't work that way. And I will say this forever. If a step family, the person coming in, if they can continue to treat the child like they did when they were dating, they will not have so many blended family issues.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens is I think some families do see it as we're starting a new family. And that's just not the way it is for a child.
Right.
If you use your empathy skills for the child, I don't have a new family. You've added new people to my already existing family. My existing family is my mom and dad. Now I have 4 sets of grandparents, which is awesome. Now I get to have, 2 birthdays sometimes, not just one. There's all kinds of benefits to this, but it's not creating a new family. There's a co-parenting program out there called Two Families Now. And I bet it's a great course. I bet it's got great content. I think there's a lot of research under it, but I hate the name of that program. Because again, Two Families Now. No, it isn't. Not if we're from the child's perspective.
Well, Neil, what about the word blended? Because you brought up blended, and I didn't know that till I started writing my book. And the lady that's helping me edit my book, she said, you don't want to use the word blended.
Yeah. A lot of step families seem to have bias towards that term. I'm not sure.
Well,
I don't.
It's because
maybe
if you're not blended, it makes you feel bad. That's the whole mentality of, if you don't feel blended, then you feel less than.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, it does make sense.
Yeah.
Actually, and I don't know how accurate my information is because Google was my teacher as far as this goes, but blended families originally came from mixed races. And then somebody didn't like the name step families and said, no, don't say the word step. It's bad. Let's be blended families. So the word blended families has changed over time to accommodate this. And I'm good with another family or my other family or Lori's family.
I think what's truly blended family is cooperative co-parenting.
Yeah.
From a child's point of view, blended means I have biological parents, step siblings, step relatives, and we're all blended together with everybody having the common interest of my well-being. That's truly a blended family to me.
Yeah. And I'm thinking while you're talking about this, we've got grandkids now, step grandkids. So you think when the bio kids or the step kids move out that things are going to get so much better. They do get better and they're easier, but you deal with a different set of problems. So now one of the step kids, do we expect them to have 2 parties just because David and his ex don't get along? That's ridiculous. But some people have that mentality.
Yeah.
Of you've got to keep it separate. And, I've been in situations where I've had to be around people I don't like. We do it every day at work. How do you handle those situations? You don't throw a fit and say, I can't, and just have a meltdown. You go.
Yeah. And you act
appropriately.
Yeah. I talk about in my book the co-parenting business relationship or co-parenting alliance that if you acted this way, you'd be fired. And if you're acting that way in your co-parenting relationship, your child just doesn't have the right to fire you. Now, the judge has the right to restrict your parenting time, maybe, but you can't be fired, unfortunately, from parenting.
Right.
But now we have a whole political atmosphere that is so conflicted that, a lot of us that specialize in working with high conflict families are seeing just these huge increase in conflict because our societal structure in the United States, it seems to be very, very conflictual, taking sides, victim mentality, fill in the blanks. And when your nation is kind of divided that way, I think it's spilling into a lot of these families, sadly.
I 100% agree with you. Same thing with COVID. It impacted these kids more than we will ever know in our lifetime. It impacted the parents of this, because you may have one parent that used it as an excuse for the kid not to go for their visitation.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other parent that may not have been able to contact their kid, and the kid thinks they just abandoned them. There's so much to how all this is impacted.
Yeah.
Did you, I know we need to wrap up because I've had you on here forever, but I've really enjoyed
Holy
this.
cow, it is 1:51. Yeah.
Yeah.
1:51 my time.
Yeah. Did you have step parents?
I had a stepmother. Yeah.
Okay.
And what I would say is, and this is what a lot of, I think, older kids refer to a step-parent as, my dad remarried. My dad had a new wife. My relationship with my stepmother was not.
Well, you couldn't.
Not great. It wasn't horrible either. It's just I had a good mother. I was, pretty much a teenager when I met her, and
yeah, and you were a visitor basically to her a couple months out of the year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my dad did move back to Texas.
Okay.
And that's when he got remarried and stuff. And so, but still they were in Houston and I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So that was still a 6-hour drive. So
I know earlier when you said that sometimes courts will stop you from moving out of Texas, I'm like, well, you could just move to the other side of Texas,
because we're so huge. Yeah. What our courts tend to do is it'll say Dallas and contiguous county. So the parent that has primary, I hate that term. The parent that has primary is restricted to Dallas or contiguous counties. But even that can be 60 miles. And, for a child growing up between two homes, that's a 60-minute drive one way, 60-minute drive back. And
that might as well be across the country.
I want to throw out one more statement before we get off. You mentioned the word visitation, which is also a phrase that I really dislike, because I don't think children visit their mom or dad. Even when I go see my dad, during those summers, I had a bed. I had, it was my other home, the way I see that. And
so you had a room and you were only there in the summer?
Well, I didn't have a room. I shared a bed with him, depending on where he was.
Okay.
At other places I did. There was a time that he lived with my uncle. And so I had my own room over there because my uncle was awesome and my aunt was awesome. And they always set those things up for me. So
parenting time, is that what you prefer?
Parenting time. I like parenting time. I like using the term when I'm talking to parents, your period of responsibility. So instead of like period of possession or when they're visiting with me, I like period of responsibility.
I don't like that. Only because your responsibility doesn't end just because the child's not with you.
No, but think about period of possession. Okay.
I don't like that either.
Means, and that's a phrase we often use here in Texas because our family code uses words like possession, custody. A lot of states have moved away from that. Texas still, sadly, we use that language. But my period of possession, hey, it's my property. I get to do what I want with it. My period of responsibility, if he's in soccer, I should take him to the soccer game because his friends, his teammates are relying on him. So if we look at it as a period of responsibility where it's defined, I'm responsible all the time, but this is my defined period of responsibility. But parenting time, I think, is just as good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you say that about visitation. I say it constantly. I don't think about it, but I remember when Jackson's dad and I first went to court and I saw the visitation word, I'm like, is it a funeral? Yeah. Because that's what we call the wake. No, it's not a wake. I think Catholics have a wake. And
but the visitation period.
Yeah, the visitation is at a funeral. Yeah.
Or visitation is someplace that you don't live. And if I'm a child who every other weekend or first, third, and fifth weekends is in another home, or in Texas, the standard expanded is from the time school lets out on Thursday till school resumes Friday, first, third, and fifth weekends from the time school lets out on Thursday till school resumes Friday morning, and then from that Friday until Monday, all these different things, different states do it differently, but that's almost 50% of the child's life. That's a home.
Yeah.
They live in another home.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, and I know I've got to quit asking you questions. We're going to have you back. I know that. But there are parents that the kid stays in the home and the parents are the ones that alternate houses.
Yeah.
Or like you've got 3 houses. You've got the home with the kids. You've got your own home. They've got their own home, but they go to see the kids at the common home.
Yeah. There's a group that called it child sharing and didn't like the word nesting or bird nesting. And I think that website came down because I used to link to it. And I'm not sure why. But there were parents who did that, but they just hated the word nesting and bird nesting. And that's what I always refer to it. In my book, I do talk about nesting. And, here's the truth with our family law situation. Again, we use this term best interest. If it were truly best interest, then if 2 people choose not to live with each other, then the child should be the one who stays in the home. And the 2 people who chose not to live together should be the ones who have to move in and out of that home and figure out how to negotiate relationships and school and friends and all these things that we place on the burden on the children. Yeah, so that's called nesting, where either they have an extremely large home and that home is divided in half. There's some families that do nesting, but both parents do live in separate homes, but they live on the same block. So it's just, it's still kind of the same idea, though. There is no schedule for the child. The child just, goes in and out of that. It's kind of like society used to be. When you think about, we used to understand it takes a village to raise a child. So moms and dads were staying together. We didn't have the divorce rate, but grandma lived down the street and Aunt Joan lived down the street, and everybody was working together to raise the children. And so these children kind of had 2 or 3 different homes that they were eating in and spending the night in and so on.
Right.
So nesting it is generally where dad has a rundown studio apartment because that's all he can afford. And then goes into the really nice home that the child is staying in. And then mom goes to her rundown studio apartment because that's all she can afford. But the money goes to the child. And again, the parents then have to figure out how to deal with the issues of remarriage and things like that.
That's a very interesting way to think about that. I'm curious. I'm sure somebody's probably doing a study on it about how it impacts the kids differently and what the kids think about staying in the same home. And then all of a sudden it's mom's here or dad's here. And I would think that the mom and dad would have to have a pretty good co-parenting relationship for that to happen. And I would also say that they're probably not in another relationship. Is that usually the case?
So I think quite often, and there has to be some level of trust. These people have to have good boundaries. For example, there's a closet here with a yellow door, and dad never goes into that closet because that's mom's closet, and vice versa. There's a blue door, and that's where dad keeps his stuff and things. There's some trust that I think is needed in a situation like that, but not necessarily when parents live, just a block away from each other. If I had my way, I think I'd except in domestic violence situations, and I'm talking about the power control domestic violence. If I had the black robe and the gavel, I think you all are ordered to live no more than 3 blocks from me, no more than child's walking distance from each other.
Yeah. That's a good thought. It really is. I know several people that we've worked with have done that. They live really close. What's funny is one couple, they went to buy the house and they didn't realize till like closing day. They had already closed. They went to go put stuff on the back porch and they look up and bio mom bought the house behind them.
Wow.
She's a stalker.
Child, but that does seem a little intrusive.
Yeah. Run through the backyard, go to your mama's house.
Yeah.
Well, Bradley, it has been great having you as a guest on our podcast.
Thank you so much for talking to me, Lori. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm going to reach out to you to get our family wizards contact information, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Sounds great. Just reach out to me.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
When I was talking to Bradley, he made a comment and said, a lot of times people are like, my house, my rules. He wasn't saying that from a step parent point of view.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a parent point of view.
Yeah.
But I hate that phrase.
Yeah. I'm not a fan either.
My response is when people say, from a step parent point of view, my house, my rules. Well, where does your partner live? Where do
Mhm.
their kids live? And I don't care if those kids only come one day a month or 2 weeks in the summer. That's still their home.
Yeah.
Hey, but they can't hear you shaking your head.
You sure you don't hear that rattling in
I'm
there?
sure. I'm sure. But a lot of people go, well, it's my house. My name's on it. I would hate to be married to you or in a relationship with you if that's your mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm going to feel like I'm quote, quote, renting from someone or have a landlord, I'm not going to be living with you. I'm going to live on my own.
That's right.
He also talked about words he hated. And David, I know you weren't a part of this, but we talk about hating the word stepmom and
Mhm.
stepdad.
Yeah.
And it's not because of the step part. You know, a lot of people say, we don't say step in our family. Oh, we say step all the time.
Yeah.
It's a part of our natural vernacular. Look at that word, vernacular. Look at you, Lord. But a lot of people don't like it and won't say it.
Mm-hmm.
But I told him, I said, our issue is the mom and the dad part.
Yep.
So, David, I'm really trying. I've got to come up with a better word. So far, the only thing I've came up with is a step people
Step people.
or a step person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Because they even, some people say, I don't say, for example, stepmom, they'll say bonus mom or whatever. But still, my point is, it's still using the mom phrase. It's
Right.
still putting that role there that is not, it's not available. And I understand, look, if it works for you and all that, that's good. Don't stop using it because I
Right.
said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are
100%.
those that it doesn't work for and it causes issues. So,
Yeah. I'm going to have to do this with your kids. The next time everybody's over, I'm going to take my phone out and say, how do y'all feel about me being your bonus mom? Just to see their facial reaction.
oh my gosh.
Wouldn't that be awesome though? Because we talk about how we hate the word bonus.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never referred to myself as a bonus mom. I don't even know if they know that term.
Yeah, they
Oh,
may.
that's going to be good. Remind me to do that
Yeah, they may not.
next time.
Yeah.
So y'all will
So,
see a short clip of me asking a question and the look across these child's faces like, what the crap is she talking about?
yeah, what is that?
Bonus mom.
Yeah, but I mean, there's other phrases and terms that people come up with and all that. And if it works for you, like I said, keep doing it. Don't
Right.
don't stop doing it because David doesn't like it. But what I'm saying is, from our experience, there are problems in certain relationships with trying to figure out what to be called and what term to use. And also, even if you don't have a problem with it, let's just say stepmom. I don't have a problem with them calling me stepmom. The problem often becomes with how you try to navigate the role because it has that word in there. There are often expectations along with that cause problems, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah. And I think it puts pressure on the kids because of that mom part.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so there's a dynamic there that changes because you're using that term, and you never, well, I shouldn't say you never, but you often don't realize it that because you're using that terminology, you're actually setting yourself up for problems.
Right. Yeah. You don't even realize that. And that's something that we talked about with Bradley, or that I
Mm-hmm.
talked about with Bradley, is how those words can be interpreted
Mm-hmm.
by other people. A lot of people don't like blended family. That's something I'm learning writing this book because they feel like if they're not a blended family, they're not meeting the mark if they don't feel like they've blended enough. So again, it's another pressure on them to be
Yeah.
blended.
And the other aspect of blended family is it's changed its meaning over the years. Initially, blended family had nothing to do with step families.
Right. It was mixed couples. And that's what I talked to Bradley about.
Yeah.
Well, I told him, I
So,
said, that's my understanding from my Google research. So
yeah.
it may be wrong, but people hated step family because they thought
Yes.
it was derogatory. So they went to blended families.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, folks.
It's complicated. It's like a Facebook relationship,
It's complicated,
or it's a
but
situationship.
there you go.
That's a word the stepkids taught me this weekend.
Oh,
Situationship. It's not a relationship. It's a situationship.
so depending on the situation, it's a relationship.
Yeah, something like
All
that.
right.
All right. That's all we got today. I was
Yo.
going to say yokes instead of folks. All right. That's all we have today, folks.
That's y'all and folks all
Yeah,
together.
I was going to say y'all and folks, and it came out yokes. Yokes.
All
right.
folks. Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us again next week. And remember, life is good
When you nacho.